On today's show, we sit down with Dana Cavalea, former head strength conditioning coach of the New York Yankees and the author of the book called The Habit of a Champion. We talk some strength and conditioning and some lessons that he learned from some of the best in the world.
Welcome to another episode of the Baseball Awakening Podcast, where we dive into the raw, unfiltered, unsexy side of player development. Get ready for some knowledge bombs with your host, Geoff Rottmayer.
Welcome to the Baseball Awakening Podcast. I'm Geoff Rottmayer, and today we are here with Dana Cavalea, former head strength and conditioning coach for the New York Yankees and the author of A Habit of a Champion. Dana, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Awesome. Look, Dana, it's great having you on. Let's get right to this. You know, you are a guy who is known for being the New York Yankees head strength and conditioning coach. Can you kind of share your story on how you got to be the Yankee strength and conditioning coach?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I started as a ball player, just like most of us. I had big dreams. I wanted to make it to the pros. That was my objective. I wanted to, get on that big diamond. And what I realized in my journey, I just wasn't good enough. I got to the college level, and actually during my college career, I made a choice, and I said, you know what? After identifying and really looking in the mirror at how good I actually was and how good I would have to be to get to that next level, I made a decision to move on. And I said, I love to train. I enjoy the training aspect. So I went to the University of South Florida. I got a degree in sports medicine. And I really started as an intern. I interned with the football team there. And being a kid from New York, I knew that the Yankees had spring training not too far away. I knew the Blue Jays had spring training and the Pittsburgh Pirates. So I said, this is going to be great. This is where I'm going to start my career. And really a couple of weeks before spring training in my sophomore year, I went up to Steinbrenner Field a week when some of the players were first starting to get there and spring training was just beginning. Whipped out my camera phone. I'm taking pictures through a chain link fence, sending it back home to New York. And I'm like, this is great. My friends are all cold in New York. My parents are cold, and I'm in Florida. This is great. And I a couple of days later went back to my internship at the University of South Florida football, and the head guy said to me, he said, Dana, I got a call from the Yankees, and they're looking for someone to help as an intern. Would you be interested a couple of days a week? And I said, man, this is why I came down here. Outside of the sun, this was why I'm here. And I pulled up to Steinbrenner Field a couple of days later, walked in. Somebody said I got to the front desk at the office. They said, are you Dana Cavalea? I said, yeah, that's me. And they threw a lanyard around my neck and a credential. Next thing you know, I'm in Yankee shorts, Yankee T-shirt, and batting shell, and I'm in the middle of the field, the same field I was taking a picture of a couple of days earlier. And it was kind of a surreal moment for me. And it was really at that moment that things started to change for me. And, it was everything kind of came together. My decision to go to school down there and just not playing ball myself and now getting to see firsthand how these pro guys trained. And it was really an amazing experience.
Wow, that's awesome. I don't think the story could have went any better than that.
Yeah, no, totally, man. It was great.
Cool. So let's talk now. So you're an intern. What's that process like? What does the strength and conditioning intern do, and what do they learn, and how do they relate to the players?
Yeah, well, the reality is when I was brought on, I really brought no value to the organization. I didn't. I wasn't trained outside of doing some training myself prior to that, which I learned was completely the wrong way. I didn't bring any value to the organization. So I was the guy that was going to hand out water and towels and clean the equipment. But I realized very quickly I didn't want to be the guy that just handed out towels and cleaned equipment. So what I did was, this was back when the word core was just kind of starting out, and it was like, this buzzword of today. And what I realized was, if I could grab onto that buzzword and I could learn as much as I can about the core, I could be known as the core guy and not just the towel and water guy and the cleaning of the equipment guy. So whenever players would walk in, I'd go home at night, I'd research the core, I'd learn all the exercises, the function, blah, 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 and I became the smartest guy in the room when it came to core training. So players would walk in, Derek Jeter would walk in, hey, Derek, could I take you through core? And, a few times he'd allow me to do it. And literally after I took him through the core, I didn't have any other tricks in my chest. So that's really how I began as an intern. And then as I started showing up each and every day, I learned a lot from the players. I learned a lot from other great staff members that taught me about baseball culture at the pro level. Steve Donahue was the head trainer with the Yankees. He taught me a ton, and he was somebody that watched over me each and every day. The equipment guy, Rob Kakuza, one of my best friends to date, taught me about, how to interact with players so they actually trust you and like you, because he had been there for 20 years. And so I had a lot of people that were on my team early because I was, a likable guy. And I came there with a dream and the desire to work hard, and it worked out, But as an intern early, I didn't have much to offer. I learned the core, and then from there, I started to really expand my skill set. But that's it. That's how I started.
Nice. So whenever you came up with this process of thinking, I'm going to learn as much about the core, did you approach the head trainer and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking, and what are your thoughts, or is this something that you kind of figured out on your own?
Yeah, that was something I figured out on my own, and also it was a part of the process that he actually allowed me to do on my own. It was like, you're not really going to hurt anybody working on their core, but I'm not going to allow you to start writing programs and letting players sit under squat racks and do all these other things, because then I would have been a liability at that point. So I had the freedom to explore very cautiously in the shallow end of the pool.
Nice. And what's the conversation like when you're working with Derek Jeter and you're going to work on the core? What's the conversation like? Did he buy in, or
Yeah, I think at first it was probably, Mr. Jeter, can I take you through the core? I think that's probably how it started. Right. But after I got the butterflies out of my system, this is a guy I was wearing his sneakers when I was in high school. So once I got over that hump, and again, I was 19 years old at the time, 2 years removed from high school. They were, not just him, but him and a bunch of the other guys were really just great guys. They saw that I was eager to help them, and I was eager to become a pro in my own right. And I can't say anything negative about the guys. They were so open to giving me a shot. And each time I got more confident in what I was doing, and I gained more and more trust from them each and every day.
Right. And that's the part, gaining the trust, and that part, it just takes time.
Yeah, and we always say, listen, just don't be a jerk,
right.
and you're off to the right. You're moving in the right direction, and that's really what I learned from my parents early. Treat people with respect, good, bad, or indifferent. Treat people respectfully, and at the end of the day, your chances for overall success go up in anything that you do.
Yeah. So now you've done this internship, and they've decided that they want to bring you on full time. What's that like?
Well, they didn't. I actually interned for free for 3 years, and at that point, I had actually graduated from college, and my mom is saying, "Hey, you got to get a real job. We just paid for your college, and now it's time to go and earn." So and I luckily I had some good heart to hearts with my dad. And I said, Dad, I don't want to get a real job, because what if I take that real job and then I can't go do the Yankees thing in spring training again? And my dad said, listen, you got to do whatever you got to do to make it work. And, luckily I was acquiring this skill set of training, and this was before, this was when functional type stuff was just coming out. It was just when it was like a really great time, and I was right in the middle of it. And actually, I was right in the beginning of it, learning all these skills. So I was an innovator at the time, and it was amazing. So I moved back home, from Tampa, and I started to train people, kids primarily, that were going to go play in college on my high school football field. And, the AD there was cool. He knew what I was trying to do. He knew my objectives. And he allowed me to train kids. They'd come with $60 in cash. They'd pay me the cash. I'd train them for an hour, and I'd see them a couple days later. And that was my business. And, I got myself probably making $1,000 a week, cash on a high school football field, because I wasn't ready to take on a real job with real responsibilities, because I wanted to be available. And, it was wild.
Oh, yeah. So how did this employment end up happening?
Yeah. So, again, I went back down to spring training the next year, another, work for free type, or intern for free type experience. And the following year, they actually let the guy that I was working with go. And they brought in another guy, and they wanted to make me that new coach's assistant. So I actually started as an assistant, and just a couple months into the season, we had a rash of injuries, and Phil Hughes was pitching a no-hitter through 7 innings in Texas on a hot summer night, on a hot April night, actually. It wasn't even summer. And he tore his hamstring. And that next morning, Brian Cashman had let the head guy go, and he called me into his palatial suite in Dallas at the hotel, and I was like, oh my gosh, I just got this opportunity to be the assistant a couple weeks ago, and now potentially it's going to be gone. And he sat me down, and luckily those few years that I had of, just forming relationships, he got to know who I was, and he sat me down, and he said, Dana, I just want to ask you, if I make you the interim head strength coach, could you handle that? And, I'm 23 years old at the time. There's not much in my mind that I can't handle. And I said, oh, absolutely, Brian, absolutely. And I got the shot of a lifetime.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. So
so now all of a sudden you are the head guy, and in your mind you're still kind of learning and stuff like that. So what was this whole process like?
Yeah, that whole process is kind of everything coming full circle, where, here I am as a young player, doing the lessons, hitting off a tee in New York in the middle of the winter. And I lost my dream at one point of playing in the big leagues. And now all of a sudden, all these guys that I envisioned playing next to, I'm actually training. And it's like a mind-blowing experience. And every time I tell the story, I get caught up, because it's like, it was just unbelievable. And it's a story that most people would not believe. And when I got that news, I told my dad, you're not going to believe this. It was like, for me, that was like being, drafted. and that was my draft. And then I was selected by the New York Yankees to lead the charge and lead the team. And it worked out. And it worked out in a way that I just couldn't imagine. And that really, really took me to another place. I dialed it in. Brian gave me an experience and an opportunity of a lifetime. And I just said, you know what? I'm 23. I have nothing to lose, and I'm going to give this thing everything I got. And I went all in, and I dialed it in, and I wanted to have the best program we could have. I didn't want any of our players to ever get hurt again. And I went 100 miles an hour, and nothing else in my life really mattered outside of that, to be quite honest.
Nice. So now you're the head guy, and you're interacting with the manager, you're interacting with the athletic trainer. So now you have more of a role than just working with the guys. Talk a little bit about that. What was that like?
Well, again, it all kind of stems back to, when I started, I was 19. I was, wet behind the ears. I had nothing to lose. And, my first year, I worked under all those years that I interned. Joe Torre was the manager, so I knew Joe. Interesting enough, Joe Girardi was still playing at that time. So Joe was one of my players that I interned. He was still playing when I was an intern, so I knew Joe. And then actually when Joe retired as a player, he became a part of Joe Torre's coaching staff. So I knew Joe as a player, then I knew him as a coach. Again, I knew Joe Torre for 4 years. At the end of 2007, that was Torre's last season. Who becomes the manager? Joe Girardi. So I was a very familiar face to these guys, and they were very familiar to me. They knew who I was. I knew who they were. I knew the expectations. And what was so great is the dialogue was so open at all times. If they wanted something from me, needed something from me, they asked, and vice versa. So the communication factor was so clean and so clear that it worked. So that made it really easy for me. And Steve Donahue, the head trainer, he basically groomed me. So there was no issues there.
Nice. So now you're training guys, and at this point, you are in season. What does the in-season program look like?
The in-season program is like this. Never forget that the number one priority is playing the game. So your training should never interfere with a guy, being able to play the game. So in-season type training, early in the season, there's higher volume, you're doing more. But once the game volume starts to elevate, you're actually doing less. The training volume becomes less. We're also finding out, what sort of range of motion limitations exist, what sort of, mobility issues exist, and how could we put together programs that are specific to these athletes as individuals, not just a blanket program and a one-size-fits-all program. So I was very big on creating an individualized plan for each player based on their goals and their needs. And that's how we went about it. So I had guys training. Yeah, my expectation was I need you 3 days a week for training, and I need you 2 days a week in addition to that to do your corrective and preventative type work. So guys, 5 days a week.
Nice. So over the course of the year, you get to the All-Star break, and everyone's body is kind of, they're kind of feeling the work. And so what's that approach like? So obviously you got to keep working. You got to stay on top of your body. What is it like as the season goes on and everybody's kind of feeling beat up?
Well, as the season goes on, guys are getting more and more beat up. It's like, I always say it's like a vehicle. When you have 10,000 miles on the vehicle, you can play a little bit. When you have 110,000 miles on the vehicle, the maintenance becomes that much more important. When you have 210,000 miles, you better make sure you're on that thing every day. And that's the way I approach players. A player at 40, a player at 30, and a player at 20 is like your 10,000, 110, and 210. So I looked at the players that were older. They needed a lot more of my time in terms of the maintenance strategy. And as the season went on, like a guy like Andy Pettitte at 40 years old, A-Rod at 40 years old, Jeter at 40 years old, they became full-time jobs in their own right. So I tried to work with them one-on-one as much as I can and kind of carve out time within the day to say, hey, this is when I need you here so I can give you all of me, to make sure that you're in the best position for success. A younger player that's 21 years old, you can give him a little bit more free rein. You're more managing him than actually going really, really deep like you would an older player that needs a lot of the hands-on soft tissue work, mobility work. So a little bit different.
Yeah, so you got the younger guy, and he's fresh and he's young, and a lot of times they don't really maybe understand why the mobility or the soft tissue and all that work is important. So what's that conversation like and getting them to say, look, trust me, you're going to need to want to stay on top of this?
Yeah. Well, you know what I did? I built it directly into the program. And then when I started, restructuring the minor leagues, it was a part of our program. It wasn't like, okay, today we're going to focus on this specifically. It was actually just the way I formatted the program. A player would come in. The first thing they would do is address their soft tissue. Then from there, they'd go into their core development. From there, they'd go into their conditioning work. From there, they'd go into their shoulder, arm exercise type program. From there, we'd work on their hips, balance, etc. From there, we'd go into their strength training. And then after that, we'd do a stretch and get them ready to go. So it was a very structured and very formatted program. And I tried to really think about it as, inspired by Henry Ford and say, how can I turn this training thing into an assembly line? Player comes in, player does this, then he does this, then he does this, then he does this, then he's out. And he knows I'm going to go through these 5 different stations or 5 different segments, rather, of the program, and then I'm out. So it provided for structure. And, I looked at athletes, they need to be coached because they can't function if they're not coached. And the most important thing you could do as a coach outside of giving them the support they need is giving them structure, much like a kid, and that's what I did. So I gave them structure, gave them a personalized plan, and then supported them and held them accountable to that plan. That was it. And did it over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, and they were expecting that and okay with it because at the end of the day, they understand the consistency and the routines and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I speak a lot of, and what's great about athletes, especially at the pro level, is, unlike the general population, they don't need the variety. They don't need the spice and, let's just make it do this because it's cool and different. If it works, they'll do that routine until it's exhausted. I mean, I've seen players on routines for years, and because it's working for them. And I always say, if you want to derail a player, change his routine, and you could really, really mess with his head quite a bit,
Yeah, I love it. And routines, I try to spend a lot of time getting our guys to understand the importance of routine. And the ones that buy in are very consistent in terms of what they do at practice and what they do on the field.
Yeah, the routine is the foundation for success. Case closed.
Yeah, so let's jump into the off season. What is that like? Everyone's obviously a little different, so kind of talk about what that's like.
Yeah, the first goal and first objective of an off season is to rest and relax and recover, and not just physically but mentally. You got to unplug. You have to be able to just be and not feel like you have to do something and not feel the responsibility of I have to train. So I always give our guys, listen, from the day the season ends, I want you to take 4 weeks and not do anything. I want you to get out of shape for the first time in this year. I want you to get out of shape a little bit. I want you to, put on a couple pounds if you do. It doesn't matter. Do whatever you want to do. 4 weeks, that's all yours. After that 4 weeks, I'm going to ask you for 3 days. So if the season ends September 31st, you get to have until October 1st, and you don't have to do anything. Just hang out. October 1st, now I need you to do something 3 days a week, and I'll put your plan together for you there. And that first phase is to say, you know what? You're a little bit out of shape after not doing anything for 4 weeks. Now we're going to start to work on your endurance. We're going to start to work on your cardiovascular efficiency. We're going to start to build your capacity up a little bit. And, we're going to do more body weight type work, single leg stability type stuff to really make sure that your foundation is as strong as possible. And that's where we start. And then as we get into this, November, then we take it up again. We go 2 on, 2 days on of work, 1 day off, 2 days on of work, 2 days off. And now we're starting to reintroduce weight training. We're starting to, get a little bit more aggressive. So it's just a progressive build.
Receive a Baseball Awakening decal by subscribing on iTunes and leaving an objective review. To claim your decals, screenshot the review and email it to Geoff@baseballawakening.com. That's GEOFF at baseballawakening.com, and we'll get that your way.
Yeah, so when you got a guy at that level, maybe more of an older guy, and again, I know everyone's different, but is the goal to get stronger, or the goal just to get a solid foundation, or what? Talk a little bit about that. What's that like?
Yeah, so the first thing always is making sure that you have a stable foundation, whether you're young or old. Now, the one thing that I've learned through the years is that there's a big difference between getting big, putting on size, which we call hypertrophy, and gaining strength and increasing power. Now, baseball is a power sport, so ultimately we have one goal when it comes to improving somebody's physical profile. Once we make them stable, the number one goal is to increase their power. I don't care how big your biceps are. I don't care how big your chest is. I don't care how much you can lat pull down. That's a zero for me. I care about your power output. So if we're going to measure power output, let's just say we're going to use vertical jumps, we're going to use long jumps, and we're going to use lateral jumps. I got to make sure that my training is maintaining you. If you're already a pro, you've shown the ability to generate enough power. I got to put programs together that show as you age, you're going to maintain that power profile. And if I'm developing you, I need to be focused on continuing to increase your power. And you do that in a much different way than just, lift and get strong and get big. That doesn't carry over to the game. So many years I would see guys that were big and burly, and I'm like, they're probably going to suck, because the players that are loose and limber but are explosive, that's the player that always goes on and has results, provided that their head is intact as well.
So the internet's kind of a scary place.
It's a dangerous place.
Yeah, that would be a better way to put it. It's a dangerous place. So
yeah,
with all these programs floating around that say you need to do this, you need to do that, say Olympic lifting, or no, you need to do yoga. How can one say that? And what are your thoughts?
Well, the only way you could say whether somebody needs a certain thing versus another is if you assess and evaluate them and you're able to see a deficit that exists. If somebody has power, or if somebody has adequate flexibility in all ranges of motion, yoga becomes less important for flexibility, but you still may want to use it on a recovery day for the mental benefits and just to elongate the tissue. So the internet is the worst place to go find routines. And what I find a lot of kids doing today is they'll go on Instagram and they'll see exercises they like. They'll pick those 5 or 10 exercises and they'll call that their routine. Now, when it comes to Olympic lifting, I'm a fan of Olympic lifting because we're trying to generate and build more power in our players. So Olympic lifting is great, but you got to understand, Olympic lifting is a very, very intensive, high coaching, high teach ask. It's not easy to teach somebody to Olympic lift well. And you start them off using their body weight, you start them off using a dowel. But if they can't even control their body, like most young athletes, they can't stand on one leg and reach out to the side. They can't even do a quarter squat on a single leg. They can't lunge without their front leg, bowing in and bowing out. So if you Olympic lift them, you're going to potentially really get them hurt. So you got to build that foundation. And I spend so much time, like I said, building foundation. I have a player now, he's playing at Boston College, and he's a freshman there. I got him in 10th grade. And I said, listen, for your sophomore year, I want to tell you something. We are going to just focus on making you stable. Strong core, strong foundation, strong glutes, work on the ability to actually squat properly, to lunge, to step up. And we're going to build strength like that. But moving resistance is not my goal and concern. I'm going to teach you the foundations of Olympic lifting. And then that following year, when you show proficiency, that's when we're really going to get going. And this guy went from lifting basically the body weight in a bar the end of his sophomore year to clean pulling over 400 pounds. And he was only 180 pounds. So in a very short period of time, we made those gains, but only because we built a rock solid foundation.
Yeah, and that's where I think the patient part had to come into play. We are so quick. We don't want to do the non-sexy work. We want to do all the sexy work. But the non-sexy work is what allows you to do the sexy work.
Exactly.
And we're skipping all of that. And it's dangerous, like you said.
Yeah, and I'll have you know this. You know, when I design programs, 25 to 30% of my program always is the actual like weight training. The other 70% is all the preparatory work, all the stability, all the foundational work. I never let that go, ever. So they're only really getting after it for 30% of the program. And when you're a good teacher and a great coach, they understand the importance of that 70%, and that's what makes them unshakable and unbreakable in a lot of ways. So that's why I have, you know, now there's all these quick fix programs that exist. Oh, get these weighted balls and start launching them into nets. And it's like, if you have a guy that can't even control his scap, he has a forward rounded shoulder posture like a lot of young athletes do today, go ahead and do that. You'll gain some miles an hour. I guarantee you'll blow out. It's just a matter of time. So I'm a subscriber of a very, very important word, development. And as a coach, especially in the youth ranks, you have one job: develop and cultivate your talent. Develop it. And development is a long-term process. Think about how long it takes a kid to go and from crawling to walking to running. It's neurologically you're developing, and that's the same thing that happens here. You know, swing mastery takes the whole career.
Yeah, I agree. So when how did you figure out, okay, maybe this guy needs a little bit of yoga, or is that something you recommend, or that's something they recommend, or is there a place for yoga?
Yeah, there's a place for everything if it's needed. So I don't look at one thing and say, you know what, we only do BOSU work. Oh, we only do TRX work. Oh, you know, we only do movement type, you know, animal. There's like animal movements and things like that. That like there's too many people that are getting into one camp and they're saying you got to do this. And I had an argument the other day with somebody that posted on social media that said basically static stretching is dead. There's no reason to static stretch. And I said, that's incorrect. That's absolutely 100% incorrect. And I've used static stretching. I've had huge benefits from it. I've also used dynamic stretching and have huge benefits for it. So it's everything's got to be individual, and you got to know when to use what tools. And you say how? Well, I assess and I evaluate, you know, and that's when I deploy the appropriate tools for the appropriate situation. And yoga is a part of the mix, you know, but very few players do it. And if you don't like yoga and I prescribe it, what are you going to get out of it? You know? So it's a part of it. And I'm not saying it's good and I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying that it's situational. And if you're a team and you see that most of your kids have tight hip flexors and they're locked up, which a lot of kids do, and as a coach you want to have a yoga class on a Saturday, that's great. I will never speak against that. But it comes down to, you know, knowing when to deploy your resources. And as a youth coach, you got to know, you know, your overall objectives. If 90% of your team is tight, yoga is probably a good option. But so is, you know, you can also use other rope stretching, and you could also use some other strategies as well.
Yeah, so you got a guy that is hurt, and he's coming back. He did his rehab or whatever, and now he's starting back on a strength program. What is that like? Is the routine of assembly?
Well, it all depends if he's surgically hurt and he had to get surgery and he's coming back and where he is in that process. But for the most part, when somebody gets hurt, you got to go all the way back down the ladder, start building their foundation again. Once they show proficiency, that they're stable, their body's under control, and they're able to show you competency, then, you can start to move them through. I always call it the progressions, the continuum. You can move them up the ladder. But if they don't show that proficiency, again, you're setting yourself up to fail. So they have to earn their way up that ladder.
Yeah, because along with guys coming back, there's that mental barrier.
Yeah, that's a big thing. That's a big thing. I mean, there's injury affects everybody differently. Listen, I've seen guys that use injury as a way to get paid. In the big leagues, a guy that maybe has been a journeyman minor leaguer, he knows he may have like a year or two left in his career. He gets a big league call up and he says, you know what, I'm hurt. And when you get on the DL as a big leaguer, and you may have spent your whole career in the minor leagues, you're going to make more on that DL stint than you may make for the entire season as a minor leaguer. So a guy may get hurt, or tweak something, and he'll use the injury process to help himself financially. That's crazy, but it's true. But in terms of, so injury affects people differently psychologically, and it's something that I've seen through the years, sometimes ends guys' careers. The mental side, they just can't get over that hump again. And a guy that may not have great confidence, he could get hurt and feel like, hey, my armor is damaged. I have damaged armor now. I don't know if I could do it, and it totally hacks their confidence. You see that with young kids too.
So one of the benefits you got to being the head strength and conditioning coach of the New York Yankees is you got to hang out with guys like A-Rod and Jeter and Rivera and all those guys, and you got to learn stuff from them. So what are those guys like, and what did you learn from them?
I learned some things that I can honestly say changed my life, and in a way that I didn't think was, possible. And what I learned was I was always the guy that said, you know what, if I'm not working, somebody else is. So what should I do more of? I should keep working. And when I saw these guys, I learned something totally different. I was told as a young athlete, you should be the first one at the field and the last one to leave. When I saw these guys, I learned something totally different. I was always trying new things as a person. Try this, try that, see what I like, try this, try that. And I never gave anything a chance to really marinate and really see what the long-term effects of something, would be. So when people ask, what did you learn from those guys? I learned that it's not so much time on the job, it's what you're doing with that time. It's what you're doing when you're there. It's also, I learned being consistent. It's not about doing more. It's about potentially doing less and being really consistent in that. So instead of doing 10 things, pick 5 things, but do those 5 things with incredible precision, incredible focus, and do it every day. And baseball is the kind of game where we play so much that we have the opportunity to really lock in on a routine and master that routine and feel so secure in that routine. So consistency. I saw Jeter, I saw Pettit, I saw Mariano. A lot of these guys are the last ones to the field and the first ones to leave. But when they got to the field, they just executed. They had a list of execution points that they had to get done. So they got to the field, got undressed, and hit the ground running. Game ended, boom, cold tank, shower, gone. Media, gone, So I learned that at that level, the rules are very different for those that are at the highest level and have 10-plus year careers. The guys at the 10-plus year careers, they work in a completely different manner. They're not trying to impress anyone. They're not constantly changing and switching and trying to find the new bat or the new whatever. It's my wristbands, that's why I got a hit. That doesn't exist with those guys. They're just so confident and so convicted in what they believe and how they go about their business that nobody's going to question it. And even if they did question it, they don't care. They're doing it. They just become so internally driven and focused, and nothing on the outside breaks that.
Nice. Thanks for sharing that. But with all the experience you have and all that you've done, you wrote a book called The Habit of a Champion.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the book and how it evolved, how it came about, and what you're doing with it.
Yeah. So as a coach, I'm always looking for new tools for my toolbox and, different ways. When you're dealing with players from all over the country and you're dealing with coaches from all over the country, everybody has different experiences. Everybody has, different ways that they go about things. And I wanted to I'm always reading, always finding different ways and strategies to connect with people and connect with people. So in a lot of the books that I was reading a lot on leadership and a lot on, how to do things. But it was coming from a very textbook and classroom-based and lab-based point of view. And I said, all this stuff that I'm reading, I've worked with the best in the world, both in sports and business. And they don't go about it like this. And these people have achieved more than the person writing the book. And I said, you know what? It doesn't make sense. I said, I need to help coaches and help entrepreneurs and help parents and help, developing athletes. I need to create a book that's a resource that could be picked up at any page. No matter what age you are, you could relate to the stories, and it can keep you honest and it can keep you moving through your journey and give you just really sound core principles and using stories and examples to do so. And that's really what the book was about. There was such a gap between what I was reading and what I actually experienced from the best in the world. And I said, you know what, this doesn't make sense. I want to expose people to the real stuff and not the sugar-coated, fluffy type stuff that's out there. That's just, it sounds great, but it doesn't work.
Right. It's definitely a great book, and I highly recommend it.
Thank you.
So with the CEO that you've worked with and some of the leadership that you've worked with, have you found a lot of similarities to what they do compared to some of the best athletes?
100%. Business is probably, I always say it's the most competitive sport in the world, and you got to be prepared to play. The biggest difference I see with the majority of CEOs, leaders, executives, is that they're actually not prepared and ready to play the sport of business. An athlete understands, I need to be physically fit and mentally fit in order to prepare and play in the highest level. But what I saw was a lot of CEOs, executives, and leaders, they didn't understand that. They just go until they burn out. They push with very little physical or mental preparation, very little recovery and relax time, no off season, play all year. And really, I saw that the top CEOs and the guys that really get it were very much like professional athletes. And not just professional athletes, but the Jeter-esque and the first ballot type guys that understood the balance of work and the balance of rest and relaxation and unplugging and keeping things simple and executing on a day-to-day plan and trusting that plan with consistency.
Nice. And that's why you see a lot of athletes go on and start a business and actually do pretty well, because it's almost the same, the mentality and the approach.
Yeah, very, very similar, very similar. And what athletes are able to do that most people can't do, I call it checking the boxes. If you give an athlete, hey, you need to do these 5 things, the chances of an athlete doing those 5 things every day at the same time with consistency in the same way, in the same manner, versus the average person or even the average leader, they'll blow them away. An athlete, the percentages of them checking the boxes is crazy because they're trained to check the boxes. They're trained to warm up before every game. They're trained to do this. So when they approach business, they approach it the same way. They're looking for those boxes to check and creating order immediately. How do I create structure? How do I create order? There's no reactivity. It's just, always proactive and always being on the offense.
Yeah, so if I'm a young guy listening to this and I want to go down the same path as someone like yourself, what in terms of strength and conditioning, in times of change since you've done it, and maybe it hasn't changed at all, but what do I do if I want to be a strength and conditioning coach?
Well, the first thing you do is you make sure that you really want to do that and you learn all about it and what it takes, because it's not what people think. It's definitely not glamorous. It's very tough on the body. It's very tough on the mind. You're an athlete in your own way, and the hours are crazy, and it's a huge undertaking. So you got to make sure that you're cut for that and you actually want that for the right reasons, and that you have a passion to develop players. You're no longer the player. You are now the person that develops the player. So you have to be very comfortable developing talent and then watching that talent perform. And you're not the star of the show anymore. So I always say, that's the key. Realize that you're not the star of the show. When you realize that, then you can make the next step. And the next step is saying, am I willing to give 100% and expect nothing in return? That's the next question you have to ask. And if you answer yes to those first two questions, then you can go execute the strategy. And the strategy is, go get yourself in a position to intern and meet the right people, that already hold the positions that you have, and ask for a chance. See if someone will take a gamble and a flyer on you. It's tryouts, and you got to go make the team. Same thing.
Yeah, great advice. And Dana, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but man, I learned a lot, and I'm pretty sure that our listeners will as well.
Yeah, no, you got it. Absolutely. I enjoy helping people and spreading a good message. I always say, I just want to help people not get caught up in the spider webs and the traps that are promising quick fixes and false realities. Anytime you want to develop yourself as a player or as a successful leader in anything that you do, it's time, and it's a lot of sacrifice, and there's a lot of days where there's no return on that investment that you can see. It's happening, but just keep checking those boxes. And in the end, when you look at 5-10 years, you're going to say, wow, I can't believe what I accomplished. This is amazing. But you got to hit it hard every day.
Yeah, it's got to be a big picture focus. Nothing good happens overnight.
No, and you got to trust that process. And there's going to be days where you don't see progress. But just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. And you got to trust that.
Yes,
so.
we need a lot more of this type of talk with kids that we have, because they really think they want to play, because it's not easy. I mean,
no,
nothing's
easy. It's not easy. Most people fail. Most people as players, most players don't make it. But if they can learn the things that I'm talking about, they'll be successful with those skills, and they can apply them in anything that they do. So. Talent is sometimes what hampers people from getting to the actual level that they wanted to. That's what got me. I had the work ethic, I had the desire, I didn't have the talent, and I accepted it. Make a change. Yeah. So.
Awesome. Well, listen, Dana, I learned a lot. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
You got it. My pleasure. Happy to do it.
I'm Geoff Rottmayer, and thank you for listening to our conversation on the Baseball Awakening podcast. Stay tuned for our recap show tomorrow.